Here we look at oil prices, what the IMF sees on oil prices and also on other commodity prices. On the left-hand chart, we see oil prices. As I mentioned, they stay in a range of $50 to $60, and all of those structural reforms. It also means addressing the weaknesses in the financial sector as well. We see inflation stabilizing around 4%, which is the NBK's target range. And we see over time that the current imbalances, the domestic ones, which would be there, we mean the fiscal, do in some of the advanced countries as a risk. We also see the possibility of this is always a risk, tighter and more volatile global financial conditions. Kazakhstan is pretty well insulated from both of these, to be honest with you. Especially the second one, it's not, Kazakhstan doesn't borrow a lot from the international financial markets. It doesn't have any plans to do so. It has high buffers. It has right now healthy oil revenues, so it's perhaps somewhat insulated from that. We could then expected growth. I mentioned China, the rebalance may not be so smooth there. We could see growth in some of the advanced economies. Of course, the risk for Kazakhstan is energy prices. That's always the case. What about some specific risks for Kazakhstan? The last couple of years have been a period of time of some regional geopolitical risks. Here I have in mind Crimea, eastern Ukraine. We've seen some domestic incidences, some distances. There was some activity in October about last year. There's always maybe some returning fighters from Syria and Iraq. There may be some spillovers from Afghanistan. This is always kind of a baseline risk for Kazakhstan. You know, risks don't always have to be negative. The fund probably says, but there can be some positive risks. And one of those is in Uzbekistan right now. That we had a transition of power in Uzbekistan late last year. President Karimov there, and so far all the signs are good. The Uzbeks are working to repair their relationships with some of the neighboring countries, Tajikistan in particular. They're moving to make the foreign exchange regime in Uzbekistan more transparent, and we could see a new policy dynamic. Kazakhstan really had incentive that Uzbekistan ups its game. We will give a focus of in Central. We haven't really. So if Uzbekistan adds another 30 or 35 million people to the regional market, maybe it even starts to create some positive dynamic in Turkmenistan. That's a positive risk. So one of my final takeaways, well, again, on the 25th, I want to leave the strong message that a lot has been achieved in the last 20 years. It's a difficult patch, but as I mentioned, your authorities have responded effectively, and that shows that they've made improvements in building into the framework. We think back 20 years, and we would have had a huge growth to the Kazakh state. It's not this economic disturbances that they dealt with. The economy has been hit hard by oil prices, strong and appropriate measures, and as I mentioned, still a number of important issues need to be addressed. The key ones I want to leave with you are restoring the health of the sector. We're likely to see some policy actions taken to address the financial sector. Those are necessary. The balance sheet so that the could start the real economy. Assets, non-performing assets can be sold to new investors at a price that's more reflects their value and be put to good use. And again, the essential task for Kazakhstan is diversifying away from oil. And one can think of some areas like agribusiness, transportation, logistics, light might be as possible. I urge you to visit diamond.org for more information. Yeah. I'm going to.
So much. Great to get such a clear, comprehensive, and frank picture of the situation in Kazakhstan's economy. We can take a round of questions, please.
Nakri. I hear you say, Mark, the GDP of Kazakhstan in 2016 is approximately 120 billion.
That's correct.
What, according to the, was the GDP of Kazakhstan in 2013?
About 250 billion.
So that would imply a negative rate of 50% over 3 years, averaging negative 17% per year.
If you measure
Nominal
strictly in dollars. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, how come in that you provided, there wasn't really much of a negative rate of growth that I saw. It was hovering around, and even in your remarks, you were mentioning 1, 2, 3% or so. Why was there no mention? We know, for example, according to the World Bank, in 2013, the GDP of Kazakhstan in USD was 2.6. By 2015, it had grown to 180 billion, which is a 52 billion drop, and thus a 22.5% drop, averaging over 2 years to be minus 11%. So why are all these negative 11%, negative 16+%, which, and I have a large number of students here whom I have taught who have read these figures.
Yeah.
Why are they not big numbers like that? Hearing about 1+2.
The reason is that GDP in tenge. So
Why in tenge? Because when the tenge is deflated, then you are measuring one GDP in apples and the next GDP in walnuts or almonds. So why don't we go back to USD? And I'd be reluctant to mention that we suffered negative growth in the neighborhood of 11%, from 236 billion to 184 billion.
Well, the measuring in dollars is only one metric. The main metric
Would you argue that measuring in tenge is a better metric? It gives us some better picture?
Well, I think it depends on the picture that you're trying to measure. If you want to look at the let's say the of the nation in terms of what it's able to import in dollars, then you would.
Well, then you might want to go to purchasing.
Sure.
That will also be in USD. That will also give you negative rates of growth, quite substantial, because we know that in this period, in dollar, not dramatic at all.
Sure.
Throughout the world.
Yeah.
In fact, commodity prices fell, if anything. Thus,
Agreed.
even if you want to look at the purchasing part, what I'm trying to suggest is that my students have a hard time reconciling some of the facts that they get from the World Bank publication that we observe, including data. And data indicates negative 11% per year, 2013 to 14 to 15, but we don't see that in the presentation. How do you reconcile that?
Again, I just reconcile it as the GDP is measured in purposes of the statistic. It's measured in local currency. So if you, I mean, you could measure GDP in rubles, and you could say that if the ruble depreciated by more than the Kazakh, then actually you have higher purchasing power now in Russia than you did 2 or 3 years ago. So it's useful to look at dollars, but it depends on what indicator you're trying to show. And GDP is essentially value of everything produced in the country in 1 year.
Amartya Sen,